Demand for pre-sales and solutions architects has been exponentially growing year over year, and learning about cloud solutions architecture can really elevate your career opportunities in the world of cloud computing technology. A pre-sales solutions architect is a technical specialist who develops proposals, technical scope, and pricing models for innovative technical solutions for clients, and is a revenue-generating role for the organization. Solution architects are considered to be the trusted advisors to the clients and are responsible for the technical solutions that are proposed during the sales cycle. Did you know, in October of 2023, the average salary for a pre-sales solution architect is $154,376 per year in the United States, according to Glassdoor. Entry-level solutions architect positions start at $93,000 per year, while the most sought-after solutions architects can make over $250,000 per year. As a pre-sales solutions architect, you will be on the front lines to propose the right technical requirements to meet client goals and function as a liaison between your sales and engineering groups. Let us help you get enabled with cloud pre-sales engineering and architecture. What are you waiting for? Let's get started.
How to become a pre-sales architect or engineer. Welcome to the course. In this course, we want to dive into what a pre-sales engineer is, why it's important, what a pre-sales architect is, why that's important as well, and really talk about why this is such a great role for you to consider, especially if you're already in technology. Now, as far as the lessons, we're going to be talking about what is a pre-sales professional. I'll talk about what is sales engineering and some of the important pieces and parts to understand about it. We'll talk about comparing pre-sales to solutions engineering. I'm going to talk about the top skills you need to really be a great sales engineer or sales architect. I'll also talk about the main reasons you might want to become a pre-sales professional. I'll talk about what a trusted advisor is. We'll go into a demonstration on what you might be performing on a day-to-day basis as a pre-sales architect. And then I'll go through a discussion around whiteboarding as well. And then we'll talk about how we can define a career path if, for example, you're already in IT or some form of cloud, and what that path might look like. I'll then talk about potential certifications, training, and coaching that's available as well. And then I'll talk about interview techniques, so in case you do go down that route, you'll have some insight into maybe how you can prepare for that pre-sales role. I'll talk about salary expectations, and then we'll talk about LinkedIn and some of the roles on LinkedIn. I'll give you some insights into some of the pre-sales roles that are available on LinkedIn at the time. And then I'll provide you additional resources and also the course closeout. As far as learning reinforcements, we're going to be getting into discussions around specific topics. There'll be demonstration and whiteboards. I'll also provide you documentation. There'll be the presentation, of course, the ebook that comes with the course, and also some infographics as well. And then I'll also provide you additional resources for you to dive into specific areas around pre-sales as well. Before we get started though, a quick introduction to your instructor. And again, I won't read this out to you, but I have been in pre-sales roles for quite a while, about 10 years or so. I've worked for 3Part Data, I have worked for Brocade, I've also worked as well for Hitachi Federal and also Dimension Data, and that is in pre-sales directly. Now, when it comes to getting into pre-sales as well, I'm going to provide you my insight into areas that I would advise in this course, and I'll be throwing out that insight throughout the course. Okay, now the download for the course content, if it is not available on the platform you're viewing the course, it is going to be located here at digitalcrestinstitute.com/pre-sales downloads. Let's move on to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. Let's talk about what a pre-sales professional is. Now, a pre-sales professional is going to be a technical expert. Typically, you'll have some level of domain knowledge. You'll be the SME of a product or a solution or even a service. It could be hardware focused like network switches or data storage. It could be a software as a service focus like cloud-based services. Whatever your expertise is, you could be a pre-sales expert in that area. Now, typically you'll be working alongside a sales team that you'll be assigned to work with, or it could be multiple sales teams. And so what can happen is you're the one that is brought in to meet with the prospects to really understand what exactly would be their business objectives and how the product, the service, or solution that your organization is selling can provide value, could meet the business objectives. So the goal of being a pre-sales professional is that you are the bridge between the technical capabilities of a solution and the business needs of a customer. You have to bridge that gap. You have to make sure that is brought together. That's your main goal. Now, your main goal is not like a salesperson. You're not the one closing the deal. You're not the one actually doing the selling per se from a pricing perspective or anything like that. Your goal is to facilitate the sales process by providing technical expertise. That could be through a number of ways like RFPs, it could be demonstrations, proof of concepts. And also your goal as part of the sales process is to build that trust. You want to be the trusted advisor with the customer. And your goal is to really address any challenges that the customer has and bring it together so that the customer can see value in your products, services, solutions, etc. So when it comes to being a pre-sales professional, there's a lot of responsibilities, a lot of expectations, and also too a lot of great times, a lot of fun. In this course, I want to walk through the pros and cons. I'm going to walk through how exactly you become a pre-sales engineer. I'm going to talk about a roadmap and just really give you the insight from my expertise, my experience. With that said, let's move on to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, let's talk about what is pre-sales engineering. The main objectives we're going to focus on is to identify what is pre-sales engineering, what exactly is the practice of it, and then what are the key responsibilities as well. So what would you expect to do day to day as a pre-sales professional? So pre-sales engineering itself is really a hybrid practice. It is going to be you focused on a technical solution with really the goal of helping to craft the solution that will be sold to a customer. And it's really focused on putting together a lot of pieces and identifying what the customer has and how your solution fits into their environment. Now, the common practice areas will be hardware and software. For example, my first role as a pre-sales engineer was selling 3-part data, and that was really focused on hardware with some software in there, but mainly, again, data storage. And it could be SaaS. So SaaS could be anything from the usual suspects like Salesforce. You could be working for a Workday. It could be an AI application, whatever that SaaS solution is. That could be a really specialized niche area that you could be a pre-sales professional in. It could be a cloud service. So it could be a large provider like AWS that you work with, Rackspace, Google, or it could be a smaller niche player as well. And it could also be managed services. So for example, maybe you are working for a company like Dimension Data. I worked for them for a few years. So you may be working on selling solutions that are going to be focused mainly on a data center, like data center services, where the company that you work for is going to sell a package of solutions and services and manage it for the customer. So that could be one of the areas as well. And then there's other areas you could focus on as well, such as really driving down the niche into like the government sector or healthcare or telecom, right? So there could be a number of avenues there. Now, what would be really the difference between a pre-sales engineer and sales? Or what's the difference between pre-sales engineering and sales? Now, in reality, pre-sales engineers are going to be different than sales. So when I say salespeople, that's going to be like an account executive. That's going to be, for example, a sales representative, an SDR even, right? That's the sales team. You will be the SE or the SA, so the sales engineer or the sales architect. And again, you're going to be typically under engineering, whereas the sales team will be under the sales organization. Now, as far as the technical expertise, this is going to be where you shine. This is where you, as the technical expert, will be able to talk about your solution and how it will help the customer solve a problem or increase revenue or whatever the business objective is that they need help with. You'll work with clients on a consultative basis. In other words, you're really the trusted advisor is what you would be. What would be some of the common responsibilities? So it's really about customer engagement. Working with the customer, walking through whiteboards, maybe setting up for demonstration, or maybe it's putting together a quote, whatever that is. So proposals will be part of it, quotes will be part of it as well. Now, typically the larger vendors will have its own quoting service. In that quoting service, you have to go in and add the number of, let's say, data switches or storage arrays that might be needed, or software suites that are needed, licensing, you name it, and put that together in a quote. And then the sales team and you will work with the customer, go through that, and then determine what needs to change and, all that exercises that typically would happen at that stage. Now, proposals, again, is an area that a lot of, I would say, pre-sales professionals don't really enjoy. Proposals are going to be typically the writing part, the solutioneering on paper. So that's where you respond to specific challenges the customer has, and you have to have a technical response that addresses how solution A is going to solve the customer's challenge, right? That's what you would have to do on a proposal. Now, there's a lot more to that. I have a course specifically on proposals for basically SEs and SAs, but in general, RFPs are going to be a big deal as an SE. So you work with the technical leads in the customer organization. So that'll be typically could be the IT manager, it could be the tech lead, it could also be the systems administrators, it could be even typically the C-level exec, like the CIO in some cases, but very rarely. You don't typically deal with the CIO. It might be a hello, let's go to golf with the sales team. Other than that, you're going to be focused on the people that do the work day to day, right? You work with the SMEs of vendors. So for example, when you work at like a larger integrator, vendor, managed service provider, such as like Dimension Data, where I worked at, I had to work with different vendors like EMC and Cisco, VMware. You'll have to engage with them. And typically what happens is you work together as a team to place the solution in the customer environment to solve their problems as a team. So this could be an area that honestly I enjoyed. It was always fun to have a vendor help and to put together a solution that worked for everyone. defining the technical solutions and architecture. So once you've identified the business objectives that the customer has, the problems they need to solve, you work with the sales team on the pricing and the RFPs and all that fun stuff, you then put together a solution, an architecture that would work. And typically you're the interface between customer and support as well. So for example, let's say you sold 100, let's say, data switches or network switches like Cisco's. Let's just say you work for a VAR or an integrator, and in that enterprise is a bunch of new switches. So customer has an issue. Typically they're going to call you first. You help at a high level to identify what maybe the issue is or what SME you need to get in play to work on that issue with support or even just with engineering in a lot of cases. So it could be a really fun role for the right type of person, no question about it. And overall, you are that trusted advisor. You're the go-to technical person in the organization that you work for that the customer wants to talk to. You're the one they trust. That's a trusted advisor. Let's move on to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, let's talk about pre-sales and solutions roles. So it's important to realize that the terminology out there can be very confusing. And so I wanted to walk through and talk about a typical pre-sales role versus a solutions-based role. There are similarities and there are differences. So first of all, when it comes to pre-sales architect or solutions architect, they basically are technical. There's no question about that, but they do play a different role in how they guide the clients towards the right solution. And I'll explain the differences here in a second. But the reality is that they work together to guide the customer to the right solution. That's really the important part of it. And the pre-sales role typically will show up before the sale, and of course the solutions role shows up after the sale typically, and so that is important to realize. So think of pre-sales before the sale, makes sense, right? And then solutions is really after the sale. All right, so let's now talk specifically about pre-sales. So think of the pre-sales architect as a technical advisor for the sales team. They are the ones on the front lines. They're helping the potential customer and clients understand how a product can solve their unique problems and challenges. They're the ones that dive into the customer needs. They understand the product, and they also understand how to design, certainly, a solution that should be able to meet the customer's needs, typically fairly straightforward. Now, it is, of course, going to be subjective because as a pre-sales engineer, sometimes you need to engage the solutions people before the sale, and that can occur, and there's nothing wrong with that because sometimes there's additional layers of complexity you may not be aware of. But generally, pre-sales is exactly what it sounds like. Then when it comes to solutions, this is going to be where the architect goes in after the sale and they start actually performing the design, understanding the services needed, performing services, whatever is required as part of that specific engagement. Now, solutions architects, they're really the builders. They take the proposed solution and really put it into reality. They bring it to reality, I should say. They ensure that the design does align as well with the technical and business goals. So for example, if it's a security solution, does it perform as expected? If it is a FinOps solution or if it is a network solution, does it meet the business goals? Does it provide the right solution to their challenge? And typically solutions architects are the ones that see things basically after the sale to completion. And in a lot of, I wouldn't say all, but a good amount of them, or most of them, will likely be, in a lot of cases, under professional services in a lot of organizations, so just be aware. So solutions architect, solutions engineer, typically under a services engagement in a lot of cases when it comes to like a vendor-based solution. Okay, so here is the table that compares a pre-sales architect to a solutions architect. This is a fairly limited table. There is a longer, more detailed table in comparison in the ebook that comes with the course. So check that out. It dives into everything from, of course, the activities, the type of role, the type of compensation structure, you name it, everything's in there for you to really understand when it comes to a pre-sales role versus a solutions-based role. Let's move on to the next lesson. For those looking to get certified as a pre-sales solutions architect, you may want to consider the Certified Cloud Pre-Sales Solutions Architect certification from Digital Crest Institute. Now, this certification is a specialized certification for anyone that is in pre-sales architecture and engineering. This certification here will provide you the baseline knowledge to become a successful pre-sales solutions architect. And this certification here is actually going to get you fully enabled in understanding sales organizations and how to become a trusted advisor and cloud architecture all at once. Now, for those that want to join in on the certification, I'm offering a very specific discount just for YouTube, and it is in the description below. You'll save up to 50% off the certification, and it is the greatest discount available. So please check out the description for more information, and I hope to see you certified soon. Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, let's talk about why you should become a pre-sales professional. So when it comes to becoming a pre-sales professional, there's two objectives we want to understand here. First is, what would be the top reasons? And then secondly, I want to walk through quickly what would be the best parts for me that I found as a pre-sales engineer. And I'll just give you that insight. So let's talk about some of the main reasons you would want to become a pre-sales professional. First would be the role is remote or hybrid, meaning that you typically didn't work out of the company office. You could certainly go there if it's local or whatever, but you are more required to attend to customer calls or go to the customer site, whatever that requirement was. It varied, to be honest, from company to company. And so a lot of that too could be driven just by the SE management. Also too, like when I worked for 3Par Data before they got bought by HPE, we didn't have a local office to go to, so it was fully remote. And I would just go to customer sites with the AE, and we would, of course, work with the customer that way. So it just depended, again, on the organization. And then when I worked for Hitachi Federal, that was different. There was an office I could go to that was pretty local, but then typically I would be at the customer site. So it all just depends. There's no right or wrong answer there. Just you'll see that as you get into a role in pre-sales, it can vary just based on a number of factors. But overall, I've pretty much have always seen these roles to be remote or hybrid. There's never this 100% in the office thing. So that was the good part. Okay. Sales and marketing. Now, perhaps the fun part of being an SE was that you were able to go to a lot of events or go to lunch a lot on the company. And that was something that was typically expected too. So basically, if you're working with the account team and the account team invited the customer to lunch, you would be going to lunch with the account team. Or Topgolf, or you would be going to dinner or to like the hockey game. Like in DC, we would take customers to like the Nats game or the the NBA team, like the Wizards. Not that anyone at the time would go to them anyways, but we offered most of the time. So it just depended again on the company you worked for, the type of customer too. So the federal sector was different compared to the commercial sector. So in the federal sector, the federal employees and contractors are limited typically to a certain amount, and that amount was so much per year and so much per there's a term they use like incident or event or something. It was like $25 or $50. So basically you couldn't take them out to Topgolf. You couldn't take them out anywhere, but you could take them out to like Panera or something, right? So that was about all you could do. So when it came to sales and marketing as well, though, another thing that was really cool is when we had a big customer and that customer was going to, for example, a large event in Vegas, we would go. So it would be, for example, VMworld, or it would be EMC World, or it could be an AWS event. Like, for example, in DC, they had the AWS federal sector events that would go on quite a bit. So, or Ask Nova events that were at the time when I lived in DC. So those are really good opportunities for you as an SE to interact with the customers or go to a trade show or event and, basically work the booth and interact with customers and also work with potential leads as well. So there's just a lot of cool things. So basically you don't get bored typically in a SE role. Now when it comes to sales engineering though, so you are the technical lead. You are the go-to person in that account team you're part of typically. So what I mean is you may have an SE to AE ratio of 1:1. So when I say an AE to SE ratio or SE to AE ratio, what I really mean, and I'm going to just say, for example, SE to AE for this specific course. So that means 1 SE to 1 AE. That means you had a dedicated AE that you were working with. On the other hand, you may be working at organizations that would have 1 SE to 3 or 4 AEs. It all depended on the market. All depended on, again, the organization, what you're selling. Again, just a number of factors. So because of that, you interacted with the sales team, but, for example, you didn't have the end of the quarter blues as it would be termed. And what that means is if you were an AE, you had a lot of pressure on you to close so many deals before the end of the quarter because that quarter closing really affected your compensation and also your job in a lot of cases. You may not have a job if you didn't meet quota again. So these things can come up. So as a SE, you didn't have that pressure, at least any time I've experienced in the companies I work with. So that was a good thing. Now, one of the other great benefits was, again, the learning opportunities. So you would be the first typically in the market to know about the updates, to know about what the roadmap is, to also get certified in a lot of cases. So great opportunities there. Now also too, because it's a technical role, you have your base that's usually pretty high already. And then you typically have as well additional compensation structures in place. And if you take my CCPSA course, the Certified Cloud Professional Solutions Architect, I go through the compensation structure in much more detail. But in general, when it comes to compensation, you have typically an 80-20 or 70-30 split, as it would be called. So you would have your base pay, which would be 70 or 80% of your comp package. And then the 20 to 30% would be commission, regional bonuses, and other compensation schemas, such as like certification bonuses or something like that. So just a lot of variables. So what was the best part of the job for you? Well, for me personally, I enjoyed being part of both engineering and the sales team. Importantly, though, I did report to engineering, and I also had the opportunity to participate in a lot of great events with the sales team. And also note that as the SC, I didn't have to worry about hitting the quarterly numbers. I didn't have to worry about the sales pressure per se. That was the AE that really took care of that. I did like the teamwork, the frequent lunch and learns, and the happy hours as well. And then also to the interaction with the customer and the consistent opportunities to learn as well. And perhaps more importantly was the important distinction that a role like an SE, I helped generate revenue. I also helped drive the adoption of technology and solve customer problems. In reality, I was the trusted advisor. Let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. Let's talk about what a trusted advisor is. Now, when it comes to the objectives, is first we want to define what is a trusted advisor, and then we want to talk about the benefits of being that trusted advisor as well. Now, it's so important that as a pre-sales professional, that we are able to be collaborative. We not only need to work with the customer, but also to other partners. You may need to work with other vendors or VARs or integrators. You may need to work with, in some situations, different departments or subsidiaries of a company. You just never know. So you want to come off as the go-to partner. You're the one that will listen and provide them the best advice possible. In reality, you want the customer to succeed. It's also important that you listen and you understand the needs, the goals, the challenges, and opportunities of that specific account. And that account can have just one person you're dealing with, or it could have 20. You just never know. You want to provide value, so provide your insights. If you have experience in, let's say, a federal environment and you're working with a federal customer, then provide that insight. Maybe you worked at a different agency that had the same problem. Or if you worked in the financial sector and the company that you worked for before or you sold to had a similar issue. This is where you build that trust, right? Try to really provide value by providing some form of actionable insights. So think long-term and build relationships. Now, this is a challenge because not so much it's really a challenge, but I'll give you my experience here just quickly. So, for example, if you're in an account and that account has, for example, a need for a large amount of, let's say, security-related services and equipment, and you're working with an AE and the sales manager and the sales team on an account that has, let's say, possibly millions of dollars of potential revenue at stake, you're going to have the sales team really pushing as much as they can. On the other hand, you have to build a relationship to be trustworthy so that they can rely on you to provide them the best solution possible. And that may very well take more time than what the sales team is maybe willing to give because the end of the quarter is coming, right? So you have to work that fine line. And that, I admit, is challenging because you're there because of the sales team in reality, but you may not be there because of the sales team in reality. So that's a fine line. And that's something I talk about too in my coaching sessions. I try to really drive that into people. Okay, you have to focus on meeting or exceeding the customer requirements. Okay, so what does that really mean, Joe? So first of all, you should always understand, again, a lot of variables here, but I'll sum it up quickly. You should really understand what the challenges are with the customer, what the objectives are, and try to identify what those requirements would be by talking to the customer, whiteboarding as well, and documenting that. And therefore, you have something measurable. So if you're able to meet those requirements, exceed those requirements with the help of the sales team, of course, then that's great. that has really laid the foundation of you being that trusted advisor. And one thing too, as a trusted advisor, is you build relationships, not just with the customer, but also with partners. You'll be surprised how many times a partner can help you with the deal. So these are things that will come up. Okay, another thing too is there are benefits to being that trusted advisor. So if you do become a pre-sales solutions architect or an SE engineer, you really should build it up to where you have some benefits being realized. That could be better customer retention, a better relationship where value is provided to both you and the customer. One thing too is I can think of at least 2 times where I've worked on accounts where the customer has provided leads to the sales team, and therefore those leads to the sales team basically can increase opportunities for you as well as an SE, because you're going to get into another account that maybe the AE wasn't aware of or didn't have a contact for. So this is all about really building relationships. Also too, getting information before it happens. This is a big deal. It gives you that ability to sort of stay ahead of the curve. Also too, if you have a relationship with the customer and they're providing you insight into what's going on in their environment, and you're able to talk about that without breaking any kind of confidential requirements, let's say, between you and the customer, that can be a big deal. Maybe there's something coming down the road again that you can help the customer with, and maybe they can help you as well, right? These are just really important things to consider. And then lastly, when it comes to being a trusted advisor, the customer is going to respect you and enable your success. Again, they like you, they trust you, they know that Joe is going to provide them the best solution possible. That's the beauty of being a trusted advisor, is that relationship gives and takes, and that relationship builds and sells as well. Let's move on to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, let's talk about the common traits that you really should have as a pre-sales professional. Now, when it comes to traits, these are typically going to be related to how you interact with people, or how well you learn, or how well you can adapt, right? It's all about being flexible, but also professional, just a lot of different things. Because with pre-sales engineering, there is that technical expertise that you have, the depth of knowledge, your experience, right? You've been in the industry a while typically. And so you can actually talk intelligently about potential solutions and how the technology that you're working with the sales team on to sell can actually help solve the customer's challenge. So having that expertise and depth of experience as well is very, very important. Another thing is you have to be personable. You have to be likable. The reality is that you could be really intelligent and you could be one of the best engineers out there, but if you don't come off as friendly or people don't trust you, then you're not going to last long. It's just not something that is going to work well in a lot of environments, because typically too, the sales team has input, and so if the sales team doesn't feel that you're going to be a good fit working with the AE and the sales team, in that you not only are technical but you're friendly and relatable, then that's not going to help you. So being personal and friendly is very critical as well. A lot of people don't realize that. You have to be responsible, no excuses. The reality is that when it comes to the sales cycle, there are deadlines that you need to meet. You may not have to worry about the numbers, but there are deadlines that you have to make sure you meet, because if you don't, then guess what? The sales team is going to put it on you for not meeting the deadline. So you have to be responsible and basically just have no excuses, right? It's perfectly reasonable, though, in most roles that if you need help with something, you ask for it. It's just that simple, right? We're not going to know everything, especially if you're newer to a company. You're going to take some time to know who is who, how does the process work, right? So the important trait here is responsibility and just taking action, right? That's what it is. Okay, honesty, integrity. You have to be honest with customers and you have to have integrity. So what does that really mean? So you don't want to go into a customer site and pretend you know something, because that can hurt you later and hurt the account team as well. Now, I've seen instances where customers have sort of pushed the SE, and I've been in a situation before like that where they said I was going to do this and I never said I was going to do that, but this stuff can happen occasionally. It's part of the job, right? So you have to be as honest as possible, lay it on the line, right? If something isn't going to work, or if something needs additional, for example, investment, and when I say levels of investment, I'm saying that maybe the customer shouldn't be going with the cheapest solution, right? And that can be an issue. So if the pricing needs to adjust to meet the solution, you have to be honest about it. These are things that you have to just be aware of. You have to be reliable and prompt. So should be straightforward there, right? If you have a meeting at noon, don't show up at 12:15. Don't show up at 30 minutes behind, right? And things happen. So if something does go wrong, what do? You let the customer know, the sales team know that something came up. I might be a little late. At least be responsible if for some reason something comes up, because life happens. We get it. You have to be adaptable and flexible. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, the reality is that in sales engineering, you're going to have situations where you're going to be pulled into to help solve problems, whether or not it's your problem or not. What I mean is let's say some new switches and software were deployed in a company. The customer's organization might be a little bit unfamiliar with stuff. They weren't trained properly or something like that. Something goes down because they didn't set things right or configure things right? Well, who are they going to call first? It's probably going to be you. So you have to step in and adapt or be flexible to help them until you can at least get out there to whoever, support or the engineering team, to maybe help you with the issue. Because again, as an SC, it's not totally your role to be support. It's not totally your role to configure everything, to be professional services. But you do need to step in and at least alleviate the issues until the right people come into play. So that's really important. So being flexible. I've had to work weekends when I didn't plan on it, right? Just because something came up, as usual, right? On a Friday afternoon. This is going to happen. So if you're able to have most of these traits or all of them, then you're probably going to be a really great SE or an SA. So I encourage you to consider that as well. Let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, we're going to talk about whiteboarding. Now, this is really a skill set that really can help you and the sales team really get across to a customer what exactly is the solution, or how does your solution solve their problems? How does it all work? So the objectives are to talk about whiteboarding, what it is, why it's important. Then I'm going to talk about how we would perform a whiteboard session. So when it comes to whiteboarding, it's really about you as a SC being able to design a solution, or it's about you to put together your idea of what the customer challenge is, and then be able to address how you can solve the problem with your technology, whatever vendor you're working for. So for example, if you're selling security solutions, then you need to design a whiteboard that you could walk the customer through, showing where your solution fits in and how it will solve whatever challenges that they have. Now, whiteboards also provide a visual. This is really critical as well. So let's go now to the whiteboard and talk more about how you would actually get started whiteboarding and what you want to consider as well from a best practice perspective. Whiteboarding can be a very effective tool if you follow some best practices. The first best practice is to always identify your objective first. What do I mean? If you're going to walk through AWS Redshift, don't just state that. State, I'm going to walk through AWS Redshift, how to import and export data, or how does networking work with Redshift. If you're going to draw out an AWS cloud solution and you're going to tie in API gateways or other processes and connectors, whatever, state that, right? So be clear on what the whiteboard's about. Makes sense, but sometimes we forget to do it, right? The next thing is try to use visuals if you can. So if you can't use graphics, try to use some other visuals if you can. Another thing too is be as neat as possible. Now, I'm a horrible writer, and I'm not afraid to say it. Matter of fact, I probably don't need to say it, right? That's just how bad I am. But I can communicate really well when I need to technically. And so because of that, I'm able to take my time to a degree, but be rapid enough to where no one's bored. Now again, we all are going to have our own styles, but from a best practice perspective, we know what. We should state what it's about, be clear. We should use visuals if we can. We should also be neat. Then what we want to do is really state the objective. So this is about Redshift, and this is about bringing together a solution. Here's where the customer is now, and here's where we want to go with the customer, or whatever that objective really is. So be neat, be clear, use graphics, very simple stuff, nothing hard about it. Communicate directly, effectively, and in short bursts. Try not to run on and on, right? Just like I'm doing now. Okay? Just be aware of who the audience is and what they need to get out of that whiteboard session. For the folks that are looking to get AI and machine learning enabled at the solutions architect or pre-sales level, you may want to consider the Certified Cloud AI Solutions Architect certification from Digital Crest Institute. Link is below for those interested. Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, let's talk about performing demonstrations. Now, perhaps one of the more enjoyable parts of being an SE is the demonstration. Being able to walk the customer through specific scenarios, or how they could solve a problem, or how the features work, or how does the solution actually solve their problem. And so we want to also dive into a demonstration. I'm going to go on AWS and just walk you through some high-level console features and areas like that, just to talk about how you would want to focus on performing a demonstration. So when it comes to these demonstrations, though, they're very important to you and the sales team and the customer. We want to prepare ahead of time. We also want to be aware that there's generally going to be specific solutions, like, for example, demo to win you may want to use to help you with the demonstration. There's a workflow, a lot of things, which is beyond the scope of this course. I just want to give you that high-level taste so that if you decide to become an SE, a lot of this won't be a surprise down the road. Now, one other thing is if you are going to be preparing to become an SE, a pre-sales engineer or architect, you may want to consider certifications around that, like the CCPSA, or take the course that I have as well on pre-sales engineering and trusted advisor, a little bit more in detail there. Okay, so with that said, let's go to the demonstration. I'm over here at the AWS console, and probably the first thing that you see, other than the top widget here, is a cost and usage widget. Now what's nice is AWS gives you the option to add a widget specifically for cost and usage. And so when you log in every day, you're going to see your costs right in your face, so there's no surprises. Now, what I like also is that they provide you what you have spent this month, and then they also provide you the estimate of what you will spend at the end of the month, or end of the billing, I should say. And it gives you the estimate of what it'll be up compared to last month, which is here. Gives you the top costs for the services that you're using right there as well. Now I go over here for the cost management console, and it shows me the cost summary. And it also is nice because I could break it down by day of that billing cycle. And it also shows me reports that I created as well. I go over here to Cost Explorer. And again, it brings it up. And what it'll do is it gives me that graph, basically, I could look at. And I could change it to a different style. And you can see, again, how that will change. So really easy. I could download this as a CSV file. And then over here I could change the report parameters any number of ways. Now, what's nice about this is you could set up different reports by any number of different configuration variables, tags, for example, regions, and this is great for chargeback or bill back or show back. Okay, now as far as reports, I could go ahead and look at different reports that were created and saved. Now budgets is another tool that I like because what it also does is it allows you to create a budget. And so in this case I created a budget of $10. And I've already exceeded that for this month, right? Very simple. And I can go over here and delete that budget. And now I can go ahead and create a new budget. And it allows me to set up a budget based on a template, whatever I want. And let's say here, I could customize it as well. And in this case here, I could use like a monthly cost budget. And then I'll just leave it as that, and then I could put in the budget amount of $100. I could add emails, and what's nice about this is that if I come close to the thresholds, it'll email me, letting me know what is going on. In other words, I could add an email and get notified. There's also savings plans. This is also cool because if you're going to use, for example, EC2, and you know you have a specific usage pattern, this allows you to basically save money and use AWS on a term approach. What that means is I could use that virtual machine instance type for 1 or 3 years. I think it's still 1 or 3 years. Yes, it is. And it'll give me a discounted price for doing that. And that's just one way to save money as well. But now there's also a cost anomaly detection, and I can go ahead and set up a monitor that can look at what is not only going on from a cost perspective, but what's causing it. So this is, in some respects, built upon budgets. So for example, what that means is a budget is just going to let you know you've exceeded your monthly spending or you're coming close to it. So whatever the threshold you set, like 75%, etc. But what this does is it'll let you know what exactly is the service, and it'll basically look at the cause of why that is increasing in cost. For example, someone deployed 10 new VMs, and instead of micro instances, they're extra large, right? So these are things that will pick up really easily. Also, too, there's right sizing recommendations. Now, you can see here that there's no recommendations, but what it does, it'll look at the last 3 months and determine, is there any patterns? Can you reduce your size of your virtual machines, for example? And it'll look at basically the 14 days that you've had that virtual machine running, but it'll be cumulative over 3 months. And that's called Compute Optimizer. So it's a really cool tool that's built in. And built off of Compute Optimizer is the right sizing recommendations. Let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, let's talk about defining a roadmap. Now, when it comes to the objectives of this lesson, we want to first identify potential roles that would be a great fit for a pre-sales role, like an engineer or an architect. And then we'll walk through the roadmap as well on how you could become a pre-sales professional. Let's go to the whiteboard. When it comes to becoming a pre-sales professional, it is important to have some idea of a roadmap to go by. Now, there could be any number of different approaches to how you become a pre-sales professional. And when you talk to someone that's in pre-sales, they'll likely tell you a little different story than someone else, just because everybody has their own route to becoming a pre-sales professional. But I'm going to give you some ideal roles that will help you become that pre-sales professional that you'd like to be. Now, typically pre-sales are going to be a role that's reserved for someone that is in IT in some form of solutioneering already, typically with at least 2 years of a technical background. And again, every company looks at this differently. Sometimes a pre-sales engineer could be somewhat technical or very technical. It really, again, just depends. Now, as far as my route to becoming that pre-sales solutions architect, generally with me, I really came about it through roles of professional services and engineering, like IT management, etc. And that's really how I got into pre-sales. So for example, what are some of the roles that someone that is aspiring to become a pre-sales professional would want to consider? So you may want to get on LinkedIn, for example, or any other job site and just take a look around and see what roles would be a good fit. Or if you're already in a role like this, then that's great. You have a head start. When it comes to some ideal roles that are technical, that would be a good approach to becoming a pre-sales engineer. Most of the time, it could be a vertical move, could be also lateral. It just, again, depends on the company that you're working with, or working for, or want to work for that matter. It all can depend. But typically, we would typically see tech support as a good fit, professional services. Again, I had stated that was my route. Before I really got into pre-sales, I was working for Brocade Communications, basically flying around the world, putting in directors and switches and all that fun stuff, and did a lot of presentation and training with customers. So that really helped me merge into a full-time pre-sales role. Now also too, anyone that's a developer can also be really good at it. And then if you're in engineering, it could be software, hardware engineering, either or, could be a really good fit as well, because you already have that technical knowledge. Now, what about if you're not technical? Now, it is also common to see some sales-driven roles become pre-sales. Some folks have the technical aptitude. They understand the sales process, like an SDR or an associate solutions engineer. So someone that is more or less not really on the front lines, but work in the background to help the solutions engineers. So someone that has some technical skills, but not fully blown technical skills, like with experience. And so those are also good routes. So there's really, again, 3 phases. So the first thing you want to think about here is to become a pre-sales professional, these would be probably the advised routes. Now, could there be more? Sure. Maybe you work at a company that has, for example, a help desk. Maybe that could be great. That is sort of technical support, but some companies consider that different. Like, for example, technical support roles could be like a technical account manager. But again, every company has it a little differently. Okay, so typically there's 3 phases. First off, you're in IT really, and then you get into pre-sales. So that would be phase 1. Now, phase 2 is when you are in a pre-sales role and you are really doing the work of a pre-sales professional. So it could be a pre-sales architect, an engineer, or a solutions architect. These are really the 3 main titles of someone in pre-sales. And that would be phase 2. So you've been in the business. Chances are you're going to be in a role like this, typically 2 to 4 years or more, could be 8 years. And then typically what you would see, and if you choose to or have the opportunity to, is maybe you want to get more into the leadership. So after 6, 8 years, maybe you want to become a senior pre-sales architect or engineer, or maybe a lead pre-sales engineer, or maybe you want to get into product management. That also could be a great area as well. So with product management, you're going to be highly technical. You know the product really well. You just typically would make more of a vertical move, if anything, in a lot of cases in your organization to become more pre-sales. But again, every company looks at this a little differently, but you do see product managers come pre-sales occasionally. All right, now maybe you want to become a manager. Maybe you want to lead pre-sales. So you want to become the pre-sales manager and have maybe direct reports like 6 or 8 people, 10, whatever that number may be. Or you want to aspire to become that vice president of solutions engineering. And that would be phase 3. And so in summary, just be aware that there is no right or wrong roadmap for you to take to become a pre-sales professional. Opportunities can arise at any minute. You just never know. However, typically the best way to become a pre-sales professional and the easiest way is to become that pre-sales professional in a company you already work for. Typically, if they already know you, they know your skills, you're literally just going from one department to another. Again, that doesn't always occur that way, but if it can, that's great. And with that said, just be aware that as a pre-sales professional, you can definitely increase your salary over time and also the opportunities and also learn a lot as well. So I encourage you to look into potential roles out there, get on LinkedIn and just start searching around. And if you need help, reach out to me as well. Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, let's talk about certifications and some other options you may want to be aware of. Now, for example, let's say you want to go out there and become a pre-sales professional, but you don't have experience yet. What do? You may want to go out there and get certified. That'll at least let the potential employer know that you have a baseline in pre-sales engineering. In other words, you understand what a proof of concept is. You understand how to perform a demo. You understand, for example, some of the important concepts around sales. You understand as well how to work with the customer, how to be that trusted advisor. Now, there's several certifications. There's actually more available as well on digitalcrestinstitute.com for those that are interested. But For example, you may want to take the Cloud Pre-Sales Solutions Architect, CCPSA. This is certification, for example, is going to be geared towards someone that is working with cloud-based solutions, and therefore you still understand the pre-sales cycle. It's just focused on cloud. Now, there's also, for example, the AI Solutions Architect. So this is a really critical one now because a lot of organizations want to see that baseline with AI services. So that could be like understanding where to place AWS Bedrock or Google Vertex, just having that baseline understanding of generative AI, right? And then ethics is a big deal now. And then also one of the newer certifications here is the Federal Cloud Solutions Architect. Now this certification here is really specialized, it's niche for anyone that's in the US federal sector. This certification is focused on you understanding the federal government intricacies or challenges, I would say as well, when it comes to selling to the government. So that's going to be how RFPs are handled, FedRAMP, FISMA, all of those requirements that we have to understand around security and compliance. Now, there's also coaching. So for those that are interested, I do have a coaching program and also a program that is hybrid, so it's online. And then if you want coaching, that's available as well. So that is called Cloud Interview Ace. Now that does focus mainly on the cloud, but it also prepares you for pre-sales as well. So for example, if you want to sell cloud solutions working with, let's say, a vendor such as Rackspace or AWS, this is going to gear you towards understanding how you prepare for that interview. So that is called Cloud Interview Ace. Let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, let's talk about interview preparation. Now, when it comes to pre-sales, we certainly need to prepare for that interview just like any other role, but there's definitely some areas that we want to think about when we are interviewing for that pre-sales role. So I'm going to discuss the three main types of questions you will get, and then I'll go through an example or two of how you might want to answer them or think about them. And then also be aware too that everything I go through in this lesson is in the ebook in somewhat more detail. So that should help you as well, hopefully. Okay. So first of all, interview questions typically by most companies now are going to use what's called the STAR method. That is going to be the situation, task, action, and result approach. So you want to think of a situation, and then the task that you had performed, and then what was the action that you actually took to solve the challenge or identify the issue, and then what was the result. And again, that's a little bit beyond the scope, of course, of this course, but I wanted to just make sure you're aware of that, to look into the STAR method if you're not familiar with that. All right, so first area of preparation will be soft skills and organizational fit. Now, this is where the company wants to see how well you interact with people. They want to see as well how you may fit into the company. And so if they feel that Joe would be good in the organization because he seems to be a team player, that's great. On the other hand, if you're an individual contributor and you're trying to be a pre-sales engineer, that may not be the best fit. So typically, these types of questions are going to be pretty straightforward, like tell me about yourself, or how would you handle a challenge with the customer. These are the things that you would expect as questions for this section. Then sales acumen and business understanding. In other words, do you understand how the customer is actually running their business? Do you understand as well important financial areas such as return on investment, total cost of ownership, right? These are the things that are important. How you present yourself, how you perform a demo, right? These are part of the sales and business understanding approach. The way we sell, or actually the way we perform a demo, is really important to the sales cycle. And then there's technical skills and experience. So these are the three areas that you certainly would expect the hiring manager and team could be technical and non-technical as well, wanting to understand, how you fit in here all together. Now, generally, soft skills and organizational fit questions are going to be asked by typically human resources and the hiring manager. Sales acumen and business understanding, those questions seem to go to the sales team. And then technical skills and experience will be other SEs and typically the SE manager. Okay, so let's talk about here some common questions. Now, for time purposes, I won't go through every one and give you a full sort of explanation or example. This is in the book. So like I had stated, go read the book that comes with the course. It is there for you in detail. I'll give you exactly how I would respond. Okay, so first of all, can you tell me about yourself? This is the common soft skills question where you need to discuss who you are, what you've accomplished, what exactly would be your expectations of a career, right? These are the types of questions you would expect to get. And these are typically soft skills and organizational fit questions that you would always expect some form of this. And then, can you discuss a time that you were able to drive results? Now, this is something that you might get asked by the sales team. So, for example, in my situation, I was, let's say, a pre-sales engineer for 3PAR data. And the situation, for example, in this case here would be, I was working with the customer selling a data storage array and software suite. And I worked with the customer. I went through the proof of concept. I performed a demo, answered questions, did a whiteboard. That was the actions and the task as well, really. And the result was the customer was able to understand how things work. And then they requested the sales team work together for getting basically a contract together to purchase so many arrays. And as a result of that purchase, it brought in revenue of, let's say, $2 million to the company. And again, I have an example of this in the ebook in much more detail. And then describe a time when you had to overcome obstacles and show resilience. That is your typical, again, organizational fit question that you would get, right? You have to sort of identify a time you had a challenge and go through the STAR workflow on how you would want to answer that question. These types of questions, typically, you should have ready in your head. Why would you want to become a pre-sales architect? Okay, so let's say you are a professional services engineer, or you are a help desk analyst, or whatever your role is. Why would you want to change your career? Why would you want to change your role, for that matter, I should say? Have a good answer. For example, if you want to become a pre-sales architect, you want to think about what the role does and how you would be able to fit into a role like that. Like, you're good with people. You really like to perform demonstrations, and you like to teach people. You like to answer questions. You like to understand how businesses work, right? These are types of answers that you could throw into your response to sort of help drive the hiring manager to sort of understand that maybe this person would be a good potential fit for the role. How do you approach understanding a client's technical requirements? Well, typically a question like that, and again, I go in much more detail in the ebook, you want to dive into first, right, understanding the scenario that the customer is in, understanding where they are now, and understand the business requirements, the vision of the customer. Understand how the technology that you are working on, you're selling, you're providing solutions around, would actually meet those technical requirements, right? This is, again, building up to an answer that would be sort of meeting the STAR method. Tell me about a time you tailored a demo for different stakeholders. Okay, So this type of question here is really meant to drive insight from typically the SE manager or another SE to understand how you understand the audiences that you're potentially going to be working with, right? Presenting to. So for example, if you have a C-level executive, their idea of what they want to see in the demo is going to be different than someone that's an IT manager or someone that's a database administrator, right? Technical versus non-technical. Very important to understand how you present to those audiences. How do you handle objections during a sales demonstration? Okay. So this type of question, again, is going to be typically be asked by the technical team, the SE team, more or less. But it could also be, again, the sales manager sometimes. It all depends. I've been in interviews where the AE team and the SE team was together in the interview, and it was more of a sort of multifaceted type of interview. On the other hand, I had individual interviews with just each of the point of contacts. So you never know. But typically here, you want to understand that if you're performing a demonstration, that there is that possibility that the customer, the client may not like how you present things, or they disagree, or sometimes too, more or less just have a question and it comes off the wrong way. With that said, let's move on to the next lesson. Welcome to the lesson. Let's talk about compensation. Yes, this is the fun part, I know. Now, it is important though, seriously, to understand how you may be compensated as an SE. There is no question that each of the companies out there have their own little different structures in place, different, what I call different terms and different names for sometimes the same thing, but they compensate it differently. And I'm going to give you an example here at the end of this lesson, a real example of how I was compensated here shortly. So that's just for one role. And you'll see as an example here that that's coming up. Compensation is going to vary. There's no question. Each company, each vendor has their own play. Each VAR has their own play. But in general, though, if you're new to being an SE, it is going to be challenging for you to discuss compensation because you may be used to being a cloud engineer. You may be used to that data center technician. You may be a developer. You may be a software professional, whatever. Your compensation was probably a little bit different in the sense that you probably had most of your compensation, or 90% of it or more, really in salary. But as an SC, your compensation could be only 60, 70, 80% in salary, and the rest could be bonuses and commissions. So this is important to realize that you will have just a different structure, and you want to understand that. It's very important. Now, compensation is made to the sales team in a number of ways. We're going to talk about that here in a second. And it varies widely. There's no question about it. Now, it is important to realize that you as the SE is typically under engineering. However, you may be under sales in some cases. However, as well, most of the time, from my experience, is you'll get some form of sales driven revenue as a commission, as a reward for being part of that sale with the sales team. And so it is critical to understand how that varies. All right, so here is a high-level example. I'm going to go through an example in real life that I had with some of the numbers being skewed, because again, I don't want to tell exactly the full compensation, but I'll give you the breakdown though, how it was basically percentage-wise given, okay? All right, so first of all, there's salary. So you'll get a base salary. That base salary, let's say for a Average SE could be 140, 150,000, let's say. Then you'll get a commission. That commission's based on a percentage of what is sold in the account teams that you work with. And that could be based on hardware or software, it could be services, training. I've never really had an instance where there is compensation for selling training, but I've heard of it before. There could be. And with that said, though, it is important to realize that this could be 20% or more of your income. And you could also be compensated as well with just salary and commission, but also there could be a regional bonus as well. And then there's other bonuses and accelerators and promotions that are in there. But in general, I'm going to stick to those 4 typical routes. And lastly, here is a real life breakdown of a comp plan I had. It was an 80-20 split. These are not, just to be clear, disclose here, these are not the exact numbers. They're off by a little bit just because I don't want to disclose everything, of course, right? Makes sense. But I want to make sure you have an idea of the structure, because one thing I found as an SE, my first time as an SE, before getting into the role, was how did I really get compensated? It was a little bit confusing, right? And so every company has sometimes 4 to 6 or 7 components to how you would get compensated. So for example, this vendor here had an 80-20 split. That means 80% of my compensation was salary. And then the other 20% or so was a split between commission and a regional bonus. And then there is sometimes 2 additional bonuses or accelerators that would get in there. But they would change pretty routinely, so I didn't even bother adding them. But in general, those are the 3 main components of my comp plan at the time. So base pay was $145. Commission was 20% of the total comp. And then sometimes there would be a regional bonus. If the year is good, we have 3 to 20% as well. So it could be that I would be making even more for a split just based on the year, right? It just depended on how well the organization did. All right, so the example salary here was 145 salary. And then let's say I received $32,000 for commissions. And then in December, before Christmas, we would get a bonus of $14,000. In this case here, my total comp was about $191. Again, that's not the true total example, but I wanted to break it down to a degree so you could see the difference, right? Welcome to the lesson. In this lesson, we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up the course with going through a few roles in LinkedIn. I want to point out some interesting items on the role, some areas that you might want to think about, some pros and cons, even the salary range as well. Let's go over now to LinkedIn. I'm over here at LinkedIn, and I went ahead and I just simply typed in pre-sales, and this is the list that came up, about 163 results in pretty much the United States. Now, I didn't really sort it out very well. I just went through and just going through 3 or 4, and I found a few we're talking about, and I want to point out a few things. So first of all here, this role here is called a solution development architect. It is pre-sales, and it is data center focused. Now, the salary range is 130 to 147 per year. Okay, not great, to be honest, but I want to talk about this because this is one of the things where you want to really understand what they're looking for and what would be your day-to-day activities and travel requirements, etc. So this role here, they're really looking you to be the infrastructure solutions architect. And again, we see that word, right? We talked about a trusted advisor. Again, statement of works, right? POCs. These are the terms that you would expect to see in a pre-sales role. They also are looking for someone that is going to put together proposals, help with RFPs, no surprise there. They want someone that is experienced in layer 1 networking cable management. And that would make sense. It is a data center focused pre-sales role. Now down here though, I won't read this all just for time purposes, but down here, they're saying that you need to travel about 70% for project scoping and client engagement. All right, so this role here is going to be great for someone that is single or maybe is married and needs time away. The amount of travel for this role is somewhat significant. This is almost like what I did more or less in a services role, not so much pre-sales. Because again, this is going to be more or less national travel from the sounds of this. So again, this could be a great role for the right type of person. Okay, so what would I grade this role as? The description on this role is actually very good. It's very detailed. It has all the keywords that you would expect. And it actually, in my opinion, defines everything pretty much as I would want it to be defined so that I would not be surprised if I talked further on the role. I would give this on a score 1 to 10 from a description perspective, probably a 9. It's very good. The only thing I see missing here is really more or less the details in the compensation structure. It gives you benefits, but typically, again, it gives you that range. It's not like significant in what I would like to see when it comes to like a comp plan, just a little bit more detail, because there's nothing worse than going through a role and finding out that your base pay is lower than what it says, or, the compensation plan doesn't make sense, right? This has happened routinely to me in the past, so that's why I'm very cautious when I look. Okay, let's move on now to the next role. The next role is a pre-sales solutions cloud architect. And this role here has had 64 applicants in a week. It's okay. And even LinkedIn says I'm a good fit. Wonderful. Now, here is a few things about this role that I want to point out that is really niche. In other words, first, they want someone that knows Oracle. Now, Oracle Cloud and Oracle are pretty specialized. Oracle has, I think, less than 2% of the cloud market from what I was reading. So it's not significant. So this is a niche role. So the qualifications would rule out a lot of people. They want also someone over here that is going to travel up to 54%. That again is significant. On the other hand, it does have buzzwords that I would expect to see in a pre-sales role. So that's great. And it does also have the regular communication skills you would expect and things we already talked about, right? What would make you a good trusted advisor? These are the things that I would expect. So overall, I would say, first of all, let me talk about one more thing. The salary. There is no salary discussion here, nor is there insight on this company. So you have to be careful with this because, again, you just don't know what exactly is the history of this company, any kind of review, stuff like that, right? It's hard to tell immediately. But I will also say this is through a third party I think it's called Hire or whatever. They're more like an aggregator, so that might not be helping either. But the salary range is a key that would be a concern because a role like this, I don't see it paying very well. But again, this could be sort of like, a surprise if you apply. It might pay well. Who knows? I don't know. So this role here, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it a 5. It's okay. It has some of the buzzwords. There's no salary range. It is a niche role as well. And again, there's some areas that I would like to see on the description I don't see. All right, so let's go to the next role now and talk more about why I like that role more than the other two. The next role is a pre-sales enterprise solutions architect. Now, it has the salary range here of 170 to 328, a very large range to be honest, and I would be surprised if they would pay close to the top, but who really knows? Now, Rackspace is a very well-known managed service provider, cloud provider, solution provider. So they are well known and they generally do treat their people well. So I like the job description so far. It does sort of define what you can expect. And again, looking at that, I have a high match. And let's look here. Over 100 applicants, and it was reposted a week ago. Now, being that it is effectively August of 2025, we have a tech hiring freeze pretty much with a lot of companies, and they are reposting and reposting and reposting, and you get to apply to these companies and they'll just repost. So again, it seems like a good role. I don't know how serious they are, just like not just Rackspace, but other companies. But the role description itself is excellent. It has everything defined, all the buzzwords that you would want. The qualifications are pretty clearly listed. AWS, Azure, technical support, pre-sales technical support, right? Bachelor's degree, certifications are nice. Again, fairly straightforward. It also has the pay range description here. Then if you scroll down, it tells you that, oh, wow, okay, 263 applicants just on LinkedIn. Tells you your competition here. And then it also gives you insight into the hiring trends of this company. So I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, I would give this a 9 as well. Matter of fact, I'd probably give this a 9.2 just because of the fact that the description is so detailed and the salary range is fairly wide, I think, as well. So I like this one. All right, let's do probably one more, and then we'll move on to the closeout of the course. Okay, I'm over here at the last job posting I'm going to look at for this course. And this one here I chose because of two reasons. First, the salary range is really wide. It is also as well hybrid, and it is in Chicago only. However, the main reason I did pick this was because of the description and how it's worded and how specific but also how unspecific it is at the same time. All right, so this type of posting is looking for all levels. This is a little bit, in my opinion, misleading, and also too, they're reposting this. This type of job description is, in my opinion, nothing more than a data collection exercise. So be aware that they are looking for someone that is pre-sales, which is about the only specifics that they have. And it could be for any number of sectors here. Could also be for any number of different products and solutions like listed here. It does give you those high-level responsibilities you'd expect. It does have the acronyms like proof of concept, statement of work, C-level, right? That's what you would expect, of course. And then qualifications are listed here. Nothing out of the ordinary here. They have qualifications maybe that you would have a certification and that maybe you worked for a CRM company before. Now, it does give you insight into the role. So we had over 888 people now, and 5 in the last day, that is. Gives you the insight here. And with that said, as I had stated earlier, right, this is one of those types of postings that I feel are not really looking for a specific role. They're just really gathering information. Again, just my thoughts. Take it however you want. I don't see this as a really serious job posting, and I would not waste my time on this. That's just my opinion. So what would I grade this posting as? I would give this more of a 5 or 6. And the reason is because it does have a salary range. However, it is significantly, really out of whack. And that's probably because, again, they're looking for all levels, like junior, senior, whatever they don't really specify, right? So who knows? And then also it was reposted at least 2 weeks ago. Now, we don't know the history of these roles, but Salesforce, I do know, just like some other companies I won't mention, have this tendency to repost and repost, and they can never seem to find anyone, even though they're laying off tens of thousands of people at the same time as we speak right now. So again, I feel this is one of those posts that is nothing more than a gimmick to collect data. That's my opinion. I'm sticking to it. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next lesson. Course closeout. I want to personally thank you for joining the course, and I really do hope that you've taken away some useful information in the course. I do wish you much success in your careers, and certainly please do reach out to me on LinkedIn if I could be of assistance to you in any way. Have a great day.